With the year drawing to a close, let's take a look at a couple of the best releases and pit them against one another. And what better comparison could there be than the age-old battle between iOS and Android? In this case, we're looking at the pure releases of both. In either case, there may have been changes to key portions of the formula, but whether they were for the better depends on what part of the experience you prioritize the most. This is Pocketnow, and I'm Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? And this is the Google Pixel 3 XL versus the iPhone XS Max, brought to you by the geniuses over at Wix. We're dealing with the larger of both devices in their respective lines, meaning that the viewing experience is arguably better due to the increased real estate. However, this also means that the handling experience can take a hit for those who prefer less hand gymnastics. That said, both the Pixel and the iPhone bring the best of their design languages, from the now established lack of a home button in one to the new notch world in the other. Alright, let's talk about the notches. I'm sure many of you out there might have thought the iPhone brought the worst version of it to smartphones, but then Google decided to bring it to the XL. Say what you will about how they look, at least there's a bit going on in either one. The iPhone brings its Face ID tech, and the Pixel added a wide-angle front-facing camera. Where I draw the line, however, is at how the Pixel uses the added space on either side of the notch. There's very little added to that functionality, if at all, whereas the iPhone makes the left side drop down the notification shade and the right side bring down the control panel. It might be a pain to use in practice sometimes, especially on the XS Max, but at least they're trying to add a reason for the cutout. In general, the AMOLED screen in either device brings a great viewing experience. It is a lower resolution coming from the iPhone, but that has always been the case anyway. Despite a comparative lack of pixel density from Apple, it doesn't mean that the display is lacking in sharpness or detail. On the contrary, the Retina display does plenty. On the other hand, the Pixel 3 XL has a Quad HD AMOLED display that brings the high-end specification Android flagship users are accustomed to. It does bring a feature iPhones still lack in an always-on display, one that seamlessly transitions into the lock screen while waiting for a fingerprint read. Meanwhile, the iPhone waits for your face before revealing the notifications in its lock screen. And speaking of navigation, plenty of changes have been made on both fronts. Apple has spent a little more time in the land of full-screen gestures, so admittedly, they are not only more fleshed out, they're also more intuitive. Swipe up from the bottom bar to go back home, swipe up and hold to bring up the recent apps carousel, and then go left and right on the bar to switch between apps quickly. Android has made its move towards the same with, let's say, mixed results. The nav bar does remain with a home button that can be held down for Google Assistant, but swipes up for home and recent apps have been added, along with swipes to the left and right for swapping between apps. The problem is that the movements just feel kind of janky, especially when trying to go further back in the app list when you swipe from left to right. And then a back button still appears where applicable, so it makes one wonder why they would change some things but not others. Changes have been par for the course though, as both phones have done away with sought-after features like the expandable storage or the headphone jacks. Where the changes have actually negatively hit the experiences in the iPhone though, whose unboxing experience reveals even more omissions. There's neither a headphone adapter nor a fast charging brick included, both of which are available in the competitor. The rest of the bits and pieces are exactly what you would expect from these latest iterations. Apple has brought its 7nm process, the A12 Bionic, that helps an already optimized and smooth iOS experience. While the Pixel 3 rocks the Snapdragon 845, the tried and true powerhouse processor we've seen a ton already this year. There is little missed in the day-to-day experience of either phone, depending on your preferences, of course. The lower RAM capacity of the Pixel compared to other Android phones does leave a little to be desired though. Some applications straight up die in the background when you do just a little bit too much. While more RAM could help this out, it is also possible that Android is just tuned to do this. Thankfully, these situations are far and few between and definitely not experience breaking. Choosing between Android and iOS is a pastime of any smartphone enthusiast by now, but both have been around for so long that many users are pretty much locked into either ecosystem, and it is a bit tough to convert from one to the other. iOS, for example, have users that cite things like iMessage or seamless integration with other Apple products like their laptops or all the third-party accessories. Meanwhile, Googlers are all about the ubiquitous services that include Google Photos, which also allow for full-quality uploads into their cloud so you can save some space on the Pixel 3. And those pictures and videos are what really make the experience on either device, especially in the case of the Pixel. Google has made incredible strides in the field of photo processing, utilizing their near limitless amount of data from photos in their cloud to create the best possible results for you. And all with a single lens on the rear, despite the growing trend of, let's say, stoves appearing on the back of the phone because there's so many cameras being added onto smartphones. Not to say any of the multicam setups are inferior, it's just an illustration of the power of Google's data-driven processing. Now this is true for both the rear and the front cameras, where the processing makes something usable from less than ideal scenes. It is the phone that, I have to admit, I personally always have in reach because I can rely on it to bring good results in mainly pictures. That goes doubly for the avid selfie taker who can use the wide front-facing camera to fit more in the frame, whether it be more people or more of the surroundings. Portrait mode works in that wide-angle view as well, with Google's data doing mostly a good job at cutting out the subject properly. Now, the Pixel has also brought some new modes to its camera since its announcement, ones that actually elevate the experience. We'll talk mainly about night sight, which mostly proves to be a great asset for even selfies, so you don't have to lean on a harsh flash. A long exposure gets a bunch of photos at once and then uses software stabilization to make something out of basically nothing lighting-wise. On a different part of the post-processing spectrum is the iPhone XS Max, which brings smart HDR to both its pictures and videos. It does a good job on its own, filling in shadows and providing detailed but ultimately evened out photos. There are a few different options for filters, modes, and live photo capture, all of which are also available in the Pixel. What the iPhone does add in is an optical zoom lens, which helps get closer to the subject when triggered and during portrait mode shooting, which also does a generally good job of finding the cutout. And in the post-processing, portrait bokeh can be adjusted. The front-facing shooter does benefit from the face detection tech, adding in the portrait mode lighting when shooting selfies. It can benefit from a few more functions and extras perhaps, but the iPhone XS is still reliable in its own right and can be leaned on during daily usage. Now here's where the disparity appears, however. Video recording. The rear cameras are high in quality on either device, providing great detail and colors with stabilization. The iPhone slightly edges the Pixel because of its smart HDR, but again, it's up to you if you prefer the more evened out look as opposed to footage with a bit more contrast. Where the Pixel just utterly fails is in audio, which is a big bummer for a vlogger like myself. That wide front-facing camera looks great, even if it suffers from the typical lower quality that front shooters provide. But the thin audio just breaks the experience. The iPhone simply sounds better, so there are definite trade-offs for creatives in this department. So before we conclude this video, let me tell you more about our sponsor, Wix. If you want to make a store, a blog, or other website with no coding knowledge, Wix offers an amazing portfolio of tools that let you design something that is right for you. And it's all drag and drop or pick from one of the many templates. You can learn more about the geniuses over at Wix in the description down below. And finally, we have the price. Depending on which size of either phone you prefer, the Pixel 3, starting out at $799, undercuts the iPhone by $200. As with all of these things, personal preference will dictate your priorities. Google has made the Pixel arguably one of the most reliable stills cameras in smartphones today, while the iPhone does edge it out a bit in video. Android and iOS users can be pretty locked into their respective ecosystems, so if you are one of those people, the bias is probably pretty obvious. Which one would you pick? Let us know in the comments down below, and let's continue the age-old debate of iOS versus Android, end of 2018 edition. Stay tuned for even more and check out our reviews on both of these phones here on Pocketnow. For now, I'm going to call it on this one, and we'll see you in our next video.